Our governments have been engaging in social engineering for quite some time now, and in fact, if you're a young person, you're going to be the consequence of it. This is the Mindset report that was done by the Institution for Government back in 2009. Sir Gus O'Donnell, Cabinet Secretary and head of the Home Civil Service, asked Matt T, the Permanent Secretary for Government Communication, to review the implications of putting into practice something called behavioural theory for policymaking. And as they tell us in this report, the Cabinet Office commissioned the Institute for Government to produce this report exploring the application of behavioural theory to public policy for senior policy sector leaders and policymakers. And so they say, well, we've approached this topic collaboratively. The programme began with a Behaviour Change Summit in May 2009, which brought together senior policy, strategy and insight officials from across government and a number of external experts. And so the purpose of this is influencing behaviour. And they say that this should be central to public policy because there's been a recent, in the 2000s, there was at the time a recent understanding on how the government could subtly shape the opinions of the people in order to incentivize them in one direction and against another.
All that nudge nonsense.
Yes, indeed. This is what has come to be known as the nudge unit. So the actual name of this is the Behavioural Insights Team, but it's called the Nudge Unit because that's more revealing and more honest about what it does.
Well, what it actually is a psychological warfare operation against their own people.
Yes, that's precisely
I hate
what
this so much.
Yeah, me too. It was established by the Cabinet Office in 2010 by David Cameron's government. So, as you can see, it's something that began under the Labour government and was just completely inherited by the Conservative government because they're a continuity, right? Labour and Conservative, there's no hard division between them. They're both continuity governments carrying forward the same project, and the Nudge Unit is part of it. The Nudge Unit was set up, and its chief executive is a Dr. David Halpern, former director of research at the Institute for Government, who was also the government's What Works national advisor. And it's called the Nudge Unit after a book by Richard Thaler, who won a Nobel Prize in Economics, and Cass Sunstein, which set out how people are not the rational economic actors of the sort of Austrian school of thought.
I know the name.
Yeah, but instead can be influenced by what they call, quote, choice architecture into making better choices for their own interests.
Define better.
Well, define
it's
your
the
interests.
choices that they want you to make.
Exactly.
That they've decided they're going to make you make.
Yeah. So again, there's a lot that's been presupposed there. That the government has the authority to do this, that the negative outcomes might not be something that you've earned or deserve or choose themselves. And the idea that better choices and your own interests are some sort of objective man as a permanent progressive being from John Stuart Mill perspective. And in these papers, they do expressly cite Dewey and Mill as well. So this is an entirely libertarian and utilitarian perspective.
I wouldn't say it's libertarian because they actually want
liberal.
to use coercion.
No. Sorry, I meant
and
to say
it's also covert.
But yeah, I meant utilitarian, a liberal utilitarian perspective, not libertarian. My apologies. But anyway, so like I said, it's done by a Dr. David Halpern. For some reason, the link isn't there, but I'll carry on anyway. From 2001 to 2007, he was the chief analyst for Tony Blair's strategy unit. And then he went to become the director of Institute for Government for 2008 to 2010, where he remains a senior fellow. So literally the Blair appointee, who was part of the Blair Government Strategy Unit, went into the civil service, became part of the Institute for Government, and then the Cameron government picked that up and were like, yep, brilliant. This is ideologically neutral. This is not someone with, a radical globalist agenda or anything, but then that would imply that the Conservatives weren't radical globalists. It was partially privatised in 2013 because they realised it was so successful that this could be sold to private companies to make lots of money. And so that's what they've done. I'll skip over that for now. And Halpern wrote a paper explaining what this does, how the process of managerial nudging works. And he gives us an amazing example. Again, remember, this is so you make better choices for your own interests, right? Quote, one great success has been our initiative to change the letters issued by our tax office Inland Revenue. Right, so your interests, as far as they're concerned, is you paying your taxes. making better decisions, right? Our tax authorities write millions of tax letters each year. We found that small changes in the wording, for example, telling people that something that is true, such as most people pay their tax on time, can be a very effective way of encouraging people to pay their tax. Even a small variation on that, saying most people in your area have paid their tax and you're one of the few yet to pay, turns out to be a very effective way of increasing compliance and tax rates. Interestingly, it also reduces the number of complaints. The marginal cost of these changes is almost zero, but they're now bringing in hundreds of millions of pounds forward in payment of tax in the UK. And so it's not that it's not sensible, and you can see why they do it, but is that better choices in your own interests? Or is it better choices for the state, the managerial international state, for their interests, to make sure that they get your money more efficiently? And suddenly you can see exactly the problem of this. But the conclusion, just to run through this very quickly, is that the Behavioural Insight team is having, quote, a major impact in the UK, according to David Halpern.
Yeah, I noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they're all very much on board with this. And you can go back to sort of 2011, you find articles like this: government can change people's behavior. Well, duh, we know. We used to call that totalitarianism. We used to call that evil. That was one of the reasons that people hated the Nazis and the Soviets, actually, because they were very conscious of the fact, oh yeah, government can change people's behavior. We can use a secret police. we can have a complete police state. We can have a centrally commanded economy, and we can have borders that you're not allowed to leave, let alone come into. And suddenly, yeah, the government's definitely going to start changing people's behavior, but is it for the better? Does it have a license to do this? And he says, well, but what about if it's just for practical reasons, right? There are lots of practical ways to use behavior to save money. And most of these new approaches require us to shift the way that the public services operate. We continue to move away from a one-size-fits-all provision and rebuild government around the values and motivations of our citizens. Okay, so you could have the government respond organically to certain different areas of society, depending on the different values each area has. And that sounds, again, all well and good. That doesn't sound terrible. And if you're doing it to save money, I mean, who's not in favour of saving money? Okay,
or government could just do less in the first place.
That would be an option that they're not going to consider. But the problem is, it begins in the practical, well, wouldn't you just like to save some money? But then it ends with moral crusaders who are going to try and wipe out values such as, trying to wipe out racism, right? That's where this ends. As recently published by The Telegraph and aggregated by Yahoo here, the Welsh Government has pledged to change the beliefs and behaviours of the white majority in Wales. Right, so the people of Wales are the problem that the government social engineers have arrived at.
The white majority, so the Welsh are the problem for the Welsh Government. Yes. They're just saying it out loud.
Yes, they're literally saying it out loud. What began in 2009 took 15 years to, all of the people are the problem. Because literally, but hang on, it's inevitable that it got to this position, right? Yes, the government has become a kind of self-aware managerial project. It's like, no, we've got spreadsheets. I mean, that's literally all that Halpern was talking about. We've got a bunch of spreadsheets. We need to get the numbers here to this position. So, for example, on the subject of tax, we're just going to manipulate them a bit and say, look, by the way, everyone around you's paid your tax. Do you think you should pay your tax?
Total managerialism.
Total managerialism. Yep. And it's not as bad as it could be when it's, say, about maybe increasing revenues or reducing waste or something like that. Fair enough. You know, if you nudge people to pay their tax on time, yeah, okay, the British state makes more money, fair enough. And that's just one example out of many.
Before you go on, can I throw in a quick plug? Laura Dodsworth wrote a book called Free Your Mind, which is all about this, the nudge unit and the history of it and what happened over COVID. And I interviewed her for Brokenomics maybe a year ago, and it's called the Brokenomics Free Your Mind. So anybody who wants to get deeper into this can go and watch that. Yeah,
no, absolutely. But that's the point, isn't it? They moved incredibly fast on this. In 2009, they were having the consultations. In 2010, they set up the institute. And now we're here to essentially reformat the brains of Welsh people because they're all racists. Because it begins in practicality. But then, of course, why wouldn't it take on a moral crusade? Because you can always frame waste as an immoral thing. Waste is a moral problem. You're wasting people's money. You shouldn't be doing that. Well, okay, if we're talking about moral sentiments, well, what else are the Welsh doing that we don't like? Well, they're ethnically particular. They like being Welsh.
Well, they were people, yeah.
They're not very inclusive in that way. In fact, being Welsh is exclusive. You're born into it or you don't have it.
Yes.
And that's not inclusive. And so we'll just go through this because this is just completely remarkable. And I'm almost just going to read this verbatim because almost no commentary is needed on the position that we're at, right? So Labour's devolved administration has vowed to eradicate racism by 2030 and set out an anti-racist action plan which insists that all aspects of public life are made inclusive. To meet the demands of the plan, public bodies have been launched which include potentially destroying statues of, quote, old white men that have been deemed offensive, and official reports are advised creating dog-free areas to boost inclusion. Because, of course, dogs are racist now.
Do they by any chance define what racism is?
Racism is the act of being ethnically particular to a particular place and time, right? So, and it only applies to white people, obviously.
Yes.
But they don't define this, obviously. But that's.
I just think it's kind of bizarre that I grew up a few hundred miles from Wales, and yet I can never be a Welshman.
Yes.
I cannot be a Welshman. However, the current dogma is that you can grow up in Pakistan and you can become a Welshman.
Yes.
But also they define racism as a collection of racist policies substantiated by racist ideas.
That is true. So anyway, the Labour government has revealed that the outcome of this plan will be to change beliefs and behaviour of the white majority. This is first stated in an updated plan released with a foreword by Eluned Morgan, the first Minister of Wales. So again, it's not like this is some crackpot fringe nut. This is the first Minister of Wales who's released a foreword with a report with her foreword in it. So it's completely endorsed by the Welsh Government, who's reiterated her commitment to building an inclusive and equitable society for all of our black, Asian and minority ethnic people and communities. So Wales is to become dedicated to making itself a conformable place for foreigners. That's what Wales is for, according to the Welsh Government. An explanation of the logic of the refreshed action plan states that the overall vision of an anti-racist Wales will be achieved through shifts in knowledge, belief, experiences and behaviour, as well as systemic and cultural changes. In order to realise the goals of the anti-racist action plan, museums, galleries and public artworks have been told to set the right historical narrative that provides a decolonised account of the past, as in a narrative that decenters the Welsh in their own national story. That's the point. They carry on. This version of Welsh history must be, quote, one that recognises both historical injustices and the positive impact of black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. Before the 20th century, there was not any minority community in Wales from abroad.
I mean, the best I can think of is Rorke's Drift. That was a Welsh unit, wasn't it?
I think it was, yeah.
I mean, you could play up the involvement of the Zulus, I guess, but beyond that, I'm stretching.
I guess you could. This has led to institutions such as the Big Pit National Coal Museum being mandated to provide educational material that will tell stories through the lens of black, Asian and minority ethnic experiences. In Wales, again, the Welsh people have been totally decentered from their own historic experience and particular national narrative. Like, this is just an evil thing to do, but this is the official plan of the Welsh Government, and they're going to use this kind of managerial technique for moral reasons. It's all well and good saying, well, it's going to save us money. Yeah, okay, but now you're literally going to dispossess them of their own homeland. They've been there since before the Romans. Just FYI, like they've been in Wales longer than the English have been in England, and the English have been in England for 1,500 years. So anyway, right? The Welsh Government directives have already led to official advice being issued on how to deal with potentially offensive statues of Admiral Nelson, the Duke of Wellington, Henry Morton Stanley, all who have monuments, right? Government guidance created last year stated that historical statues that often glorify, quote, powerful, older, able-bodied white men may be offensive to a more diverse modern public. Surely that's the issue that the diverse modern public just has to cope with.
So it's not just whites that are the problem, it's able-bodied as well.
Sure.
So we've got to find disabled blacks to represent the history of Wales.
Yes, there probably aren't very many of them, but they say that the advice they've given to the councils is to find these statues and either hide them or destroy them. So what we're witnessing is a full-on communist cultural revolution happening in Wales. Again, sleepy old Wales is currently in the middle of a sort of Maoist cultural revolution. It sounds bonkers, but this is what they're doing. It's part of a plan that's been happening for the last 15 years, if not longer. The policy demands to bring the vision of an anti-racist Wales to the libraries as well, so they're going to make them more inclusive. Preliminary work produced guidance which sought to have librarians, quote, challenge the paradigm of whiteness. It's insanely woke, this. And anti-racism training was only provided in buildings that were not themselves racist. So if you're in a racist building, we won't have the anti-racist training in that building. We'll find a new building that's not racist and have the anti-racist training in there. Mental. Just absolutely mental. This is the most insane version of wokeness that you could possibly find, manifesting itself in a place that you might otherwise call not relevant to anti-racist studies.
Let me make a quick call back to the last segment and reform. Reform is needed to represent the interests of the native population.
Yes.
And they're not doing it, and the Welsh, I think they've got a while before their next election. Well, it might be a couple of years, maybe a bit less. But Reform need to get their act together so that people have an option. Yes.
I mean, Farage has to be able to come out and say, actually, I think Wales belongs to the Welsh. And if foreigners live in Wales as guests, then that's fine. But you don't get to do this.
Well, you have to be, at the minimum, good guests.
Yeah. But the thing is, the problem with this is, of course, being done by native Welsh men and women, right? This is being done by insane woke leftards who have decided that the Welsh themselves are a problem and need to, in a kind of motherly, oppressive way, bring in the minorities and suppress the Welsh.
I can hardly blame the Welsh for not voting Tory instead of Labour, because they are both utterly
sure, they're both terrible, but Farage has really got to provide a good alternative.
He needs to step up, and soon.
But a Welsh government spokesman said, we are committed to creating an anti-racist nation by 2030. What does that mean? Right? Anti-racist nation. So a nation, by its very description, is ethnically particular and exclusive.
Right? I think they just mean they want to be anti-white.
Well, it's not just that, but an anti-racist nation would have to be essentially a geographic location that has no particular roots in any one ethnic group. Right. So Wales essentially would have to get a new name because that would refer to the Welsh people, the Cymry, right? So you would have to find just Province 72 maybe of the international global empire. I don't know.
It's basically a two-tier country where natives are treated as second-class citizens.
Yes, of course. But that's Britain in 2024. But they say our anti-racist Wales action plan is built on the values of anti-racism and calls for zero tolerance of all racial inequality. I have zero tolerance of anti-racist values, frankly. This is destructive. This is designed to strip Wales away from the Welsh people and raise up in their place people who are born overseas. This is a colonialist project, and there's just no other way to describe it. So be wary of the fact that the government is doing this, and if you're in Wales, if you vote for the Labour Party, well, you get the future you chose. Thanks for watching, folks. If you'd like to support us, go over to lotus.com, sign up for £5 a month, help us keep the lights on, because of course we're not monetized, and go and watch some of our amazing premium content, such as this Lads Hour. Now, Lads Hour is very much like a sort of male version of The View, and so we decided to watch The View before the election and afterwards. And I'm not going to lie, we had a great time. Also, go and follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at lotuseaters_com.